The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast. Hugh Call's away this week, so Neil Treacy here filling in for him this afternoon. Bernard Jackman and Donal Lenihan are with us as always. And also a big RTÉ Rugby Podcast welcome to Michael Bradley, former Zebre Parma head coach, who's stopped by this morning to join us and give us a bit of an insight into the Italians. Michael, thanks a million for joining us.
No problem, Neil. Pleasure.
We obviously haven't had a chance to speak to you since you finished up as head coach there in Italy. Look, I'm sure it was a very difficult thing to find out that you were being let go by them. Like, what was that like? Were you disappointed? Were you surprised? Shocked?
It's an interesting story, Neil, because for 2 years prior to that, obviously with COVID, we get tested every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. So I had 2 years of zero positives, and the more I knew the meeting was coming up, because you can see these things happening as a coach. Bernard, you understand what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I just say coaches are never let go. It's a mutual decision, Neil. In fairness,
yes. So there was a Tuesday morning, and our scheduled meeting was at 9 o'clock with the CEO and the president, and 6:30 in the morning, I do a home test. Positive, and I'm going, no, please, no. So anyway, in I go, and I did a second test at the stadium, and the medical guy said, "Look, you're positive. You have to go home." So I did a third test, just to be sure. And in Italy, you need to have a registered test, which is the same here in Ireland. So I went to the chemist down the road, and then they said, the guy who owns the chemist is a supporter of Zebre, and he said, Michael, you've got COVID. You have to isolate now for the next 7, 10, 15, or 21 days, depending on. So I met the CEO and the president at 9 o'clock in the car park across the way from the stadium with 2 car lengths between us, and they were, from a distance, they were telling me, Zebre is going in a different direction and you won't be involved. You can go home and do some gardening at home. So unfortunately, I actually had to stay, would you believe it, in my apartment for 15 days. Wow. to get a negative test. And I did 5 tests, and the 5th one, then the next day I got home. So when you say what was it like, as Bernard says there, you get a feeling, where the organization is going anyway. And there was a lot of changes in Zebre between March last year, and my departure, which was 9 months later. There was a change in president, and the president in Italy is all powerful, and he put his own men into Zebre, and basically the people I worked with for the last 4 years were all gone. And I suspect I was next on the list, and that's what happened.
So for a little while, like you suspected you were trying to wade against the tide a little bit, were you?
How do you mean, Neil? Sorry.
As in, you could feel this was kind of coming from a way off, and the challenge was getting further and further uphill.
Well, I suppose if I could put it to you this way, it makes sense to most people who don't understand Italian rugby. When a change of president happens, it's like America. You have Democrats and you have the Republicans, and once the Republicans are in, the Democrats' days are numbered.
So,
geez, Brad, I never put you down as a Democrat, I have to say.
I'd be more of a Democrat than a Republican.
But on that,
well, you see, I've seen more of this fella I've seen more of this fella in the last 3 weeks than I have in the last 15 years. But my wife is a coffee with his wife every Saturday morning, so that's I knew everything that was going on in Zebre for the last 10 years. But
exactly,
I know you could see from the outside, Michael. In fairness, it must be hugely frustrating being involved in the Italian setup. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. We saw Scotland try to do it for years, working off the base of 2 provincial teams. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, we saw kind of a rise in Benetton over the last 2 seasons, but it was almost as if Benetton were prioritized over Zebre. And, so all the resources and all the best players were kind of earmarked towards that way, which makes, I mean, you're fighting an uphill battle from day one. So from that point of view, it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, well, the internal politics between Zebre and Treviso is another area which we don't need to go into. But I mean, you talk, and people's perception actually is that Treviso had a very good last couple of years, but they lost every game in the URC last year. So I mean, Zebre beat them twice. It's not, this year they've I think 3 or 4 games they've won, but they've won 2 in the last kick of the game type of thing. But Treviso are in a better structural position than Zebre, principally because they have independence from fear. Zebre has no independence from fear. And look, I mean, I suppose I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about us and them, Treviso and Zebre. Like, I think the question, Neil, one of your questions was, where do Italy go from here? I think, Donal, you would know, and Bert, you would know as well, from if you have competitive teams in the Champions Cup, then you're talking that's close enough to international competition, and the players that play in those matches should not easily, but should be able to make the step up to international rugby and the pressures that are involved in that. So the measure of where Italy are is relative, in my opinion, to where they are in the Champions Cup pecking order, how many matches they play, what experience the players get at that level to enable them to play at international level. And with the South Africans coming in next year, it's a further difficult task, shall we say, for Italian rugby.
Just on that, Michael, I remember at a coaching conference in Bilbao where you spoke about if you want to be a professional coach, you need to be willing to travel, and you've certainly lived by that. And at the end of that conference, Eddie Jones wrapped it up talking for 3 hours about tactical periodization and analysis and game plans. And at the end, the French coach asked him, Eddie, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to a young coach who wants to have a career? And he said, get good players. So despite all that, it goes down to that. I mean, you obviously know what it's like on the ground in Italy. I mean, obviously there's a lot of talk about the under-20s being strong. How quickly do you think that the 2 franchises can get good enough players to get to that level in the Champions Cup that you're talking about? I mean, that's the key. If they can get towards that in the next 3-5 years, then they have a chance at international level. But do you see those fellas coming through? Is there other talent out there? Like, what's the next step for Italian rugby?
Well, for me, if they want to be competitive international level, Bert, that's it. I mean, you have to make the franchises competitive. Currently, that's not happening. It's not, the awareness isn't there. So, I think there probably is a process before this. The URC and Six Nations who I suppose work with Italian rugby need to look at the agreement they have, the money they're giving them, and they need to ask questions, because I mean 3 years ago, when Conor was there, Conor did, in my opinion, an excellent job. He stabilized things, went forward a little bit. In fairness, Italy should have beaten France in a match that one of the lads was going over and he was looking at the camera and dropped the ball, which would have been the winning score in that match. So it wouldn't be 34 games in a row, etc. But I think, like, the Italians won't change. They will not change unless the questions are asked. End of story. So, I mean, you and me and Neil and Donal can talk about this and the listeners can listen. But it's not going to happen. Italy are good at it's in their culture. They're good in a crisis situation. If it becomes a crisis when South Africa are coming in, then they'll probably try and move a few things. But it's too late then. I think the questions have to be asked, and the Italian Rugby Union are not going to ask themselves the questions, so they have to be asked from outside. And as I said, Conor had a list of priorities agreed with Pro 14 at the time and Six Nations, and I don't know where they went to, really. They just disappeared.
You mentioned, Michael, the control that FAR would have over Zebre that they wouldn't over Benetton. Like, what does that extend to? Is it financial stuff? Does it extend to anything in terms of we would like you to play this style of rugby. We would like you to prioritize, bringing through players, back three players, for example. Like, how much control would they have?
Where it manifests itself really is in investment in facilities, selection of coaches, selection of players coming through, getting the good young players or the best young players coming through. There's all deals done everywhere, Neil. So it manifests itself everywhere. The total control on the budget, and it does not manifest itself in style of play, because when I went in, but I was working with different people now. When I went in, we agreed the style of play, and I said, look, Italy don't have dominant forward ball carriers, so we need to expand how we play the game, and we need to play and develop the skill that enables us to play that, and that's what we've tried to do for 4 years, 4.5 years now, I suppose. But teams, they cop onto it, and they set up their defenses accordingly, etc. But so to answer your question, they wouldn't interfere with the technical work of a coach or a coaching staff, but they would put in the coaches. And some of the coaches are excellent, and some of the coaches need more development and then become very good. So it hasn't been an issue in terms of the quality of coaching, as far as I'm concerned. But where it's key is players. Like you have 4 or 5 lads, in my opinion, who should have gone to Zebre, but for different reasons, they ended up in Treviso. And that makes a big difference in the balance of power within the clubs. And there isn't, as I said, an awareness that the only way Italy will be competitive at international level is if the franchise are competitive. And if Treviso benchmark off Zebre, and Zebre are below Treviso, then there's no real motivation for Treviso, because they have the financial capabilities to kick on. So if it was the other way around, if Zebre were dominating Treviso and winning more matches, etc., then Treviso would not accept that, and they would kick on and trying to improve. So I think that's the solution. Well, and as I said, it's an awareness thing.
And then with the coaching then as well, like I know you're saying the actual union themselves wouldn't necessarily be telling you what way you need to be playing rugby, but when you were there, would you have had conversations with the national coach? Would there have been any kind of like joined up thinking of, well, national, but whether it's Conor O'Shea or whether it's Franco Smith, I kind of want to start playing like this. Maybe we can all start trying to do these kind of things.
No, playing like this doesn't come into it. If I'd like this particular player to play this particular weekend, is not a problem. I mean, Munster, Leinster, Ulster do it, Connacht do it. So you'd have that sort of level of conversation, absolutely, but not on style of play. Absolutely not. No.
Mm-hmm. Donal,
the thing I take away from that is look, it must be incredibly frustrating to work there. But the bottom line is, when you look, the Italians have been under pressure in the Six Nations for a long time. This 34-game losing streak is a monkey that they're going to have to shift at some stage. Obviously, the conversation is shifting with regards. We know South Africa, where their ambitions lie. Entering the URC is only a means to an end. I mean, the next stage in that process is their teams qualifying for the Heineken Cup, and that's going to happen in the next 2 seasons. So therefore, the logical next step is a Six Nations. For all kinds of reasons, I think that would have huge implications for rugby, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere. Like if you're left with Australia and New Zealand, both of them are kind of outliers. They struggle financially. South Africa brings 67% of the revenues generated in the Rugby Championship are generated out of South Africa. So you take that money out of it and there's major problems. New Zealand have managed to keep their best players in the country for a long time by the lure of the New Zealand jersey. But, if they're not playing competitively, that's going to be an issue down the road. But I think it's more serious if the Italian Union, Zebre and Treviso, to be fair, are kind of handcuffed by the investment that their Italian federation is willing to put into them. But if they're not recognizing the issues, and if they're not concentrating, and if their sole function isn't bringing up their 2 franchises to the level where they can compete in a Champions Cup, as Michael has said, well then the World Rugby have to talk to them. They have to do something to help themselves. The other nations, everybody wants to see Italian rugby stay in the Six Nations for a whole myriad of reasons. But they have to be seen to help themselves as well. I mean, and the support is there. Nothing is going to happen till 2026 at the earliest. But if they're not seen to be helping themselves in that period of time, then you have to ask the question: do they deserve to be in the top tier of international rugby?
Michael, in terms of the finances, then as well, like Donal mentioned, we'll say like in New Zealand, what's keeping them there? It's not necessarily money; it's the lure of the jersey. Same in Ireland. Like if we're talking what money you would have had to spend in Zebre, what they have to spend in Benetton as well, if you compare it to the Irish provinces, like how big of a gulf was that between the resources available to coaches?
The tax rebate in Ireland as well is a good lure as well. Just make that point as well. In other words, it's supported by the government, and rugby's a big game in Ireland. Before I left, the boys were talking about rugby in Italy being about the 15th game. So you have potential for sponsors there. Soccer is obviously the biggest game, but even the soccer sponsorship deals, the vast majority of the money comes from TV, not necessarily from sponsors. And to answer your question on the budgets, I mean, like if Zebre for everything all totaled, 5 million, 5.5 million is maximum, and that's everything. So that's not just on the pitch; it's off the pitch and around the pitch. And Treacy might have another 2 million on top of that. But I mean, like you look at Munster a couple of years ago, they brought in the two boys from South Africa. It's probably cost them $1 million a year. So it's and Treacy and Zebre play Munster. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's what Donal's talking about there. And I mean, I'm not sure, but Munster are getting to the last 16. They're getting to the last 8, and then they're hitting a block, and that's with that sort of investment. But at least they're getting in. Like you have the 4 Irish provinces in the Champions Cup positions again this year, and qualified from last year. So that's a great statement from an Irish rugby point of view. Wales is the complete opposite. You don't know where they're going, but so that's the money, Neil. I mean, the money is not so that's where Zebre and Treacy are. So on Donal's point, Bernard agrees at this point as well. For Italy to be competitive at international level, you have to be playing in the last 4 of the Champions Cup. So what's the investment that would get you up there? It's not, and that's a serious conversation. When you look at the Montpelliers of this world with 30 odd million, and Clermont with 30 odd million, and they're struggling, so it's not an easy answer.
But Brads, what's the financial state of the federation like? Have they the money to? Because if you think about it, if you're only spending that, and you don't have the history, so if Munster, Leinster spending 10 million odd, right, on the playing squad, that's on the basis of 20 years of investment. You know what I mean? So for Munster, or for Zebre or Benetton to get to top 8 in the Champions Cup, you probably need to add nearly double it for 3 or 4 years to catch up. Have the federation that kind of money, and will it be, as Donal said, the gun to their head that if you don't improve, you're not going to have guaranteed rights? Will that be the pressure point they need to spend it?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, Bernard, in terms of the detail. I mean, there's a dividend from the Six Nations. There's the dividend from the URC. They have, I don't know, is the figure somewhere about 40 million going into the coppers every year. So it's what they do with that. Now it obviously costs money to run underage and ladies game, and they're quite successful at the ladies game. So I mean, to run an organization, a rugby franchise in a country is expensive. So I don't know, but the thing about it is that you can't say that there isn't money in Italy. I mean, there's a lot of money in that country, and so you have to just get people enthusiastic about the project, sell it and go and execute it, and that potential is there all the time. So you have to have the ambition to be able to follow that path. That's a question at the moment.
Yeah, Brad, was there an opportunity? Do you remember a couple of years ago when you had the Juve soccer scandals and the briberies and all that type of thing, and the Italian sporting public seemed to be getting fed up with this type of thing, and for a period there it looked as if there was an opportunity for rugby maybe to step in and capture sort of the neutral sports fan. I remember Italy played New Zealand in the San Siro, I think, and there was 70,000 people at the match. There was a massive, like we all know, the home of Italian rugby is in the north, yet the internationals are still played in Rome. I'm just wondering, was there sort of opportunities missed around that time?
I think the answer to that would be yes. I mean, from a momentum point of view, Donal, yes. I mean, that match was a great event. I mean, even in Zebre, there's a big poster of that match up on the wall because it's a good reference point for everybody. Say, that's where we can go with the organization. But you have to have ambition, and it has to be bigger than the internal workings of the country, which is where it's stuck. It's stuck there, and I actually don't blame the Italians at all, because there's 23 years in the Six Nations, and Six Nations, and now URC and CVC, when they have their spoke in the table, they have to ask questions, and then let's see where they go, because if you don't ask the questions, it's just going to stay the same. And in 4 weekends time, when the Six Nations is over, that's the end of it. Then it's the end of it for 44 weeks. The pressure point is 44 weeks away. Doesn't matter. We go on to the next thing.
Yeah, but I think though with this, like South Africa are now looming in the background, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, it is creating a debate. And Italy aren't helping themselves as they go through another Six Nations, and you have another year without winning a match, which is very likely, let's be honest about it. Well, the debate is only going to continue. So in my opinion, the Italian Federation, they must be seen to address this. There must be some sort of a forum or a crisis. How are we going to bring our franchises on to the next level? And if they're not seen to be making that effort, well then, maybe it's the other people will answer the questions for them. And if they end up losing out in 6 or 7 years' time, then they'll have nobody to blame but themselves.
Yeah, but then, so the reality of this conversation is the questions have to be asked, but not by the Italians, as far as I'm concerned anyway.
Brad, if I ask you one more question. So obviously you've got experience of Irish rugby, Georgian rugby, Romanian rugby. I used to meet you in the top 14 when you were over watching Georgian players play, so you understand the ramifications of French underage. The big talking point, or the big objection people make about the future of Italian rugby is this under-20s crop and the last couple of years underage, right? And you coached Irish under-20s, so you know how difficult or how easy it is to transfer from being a very good under-20 player to being a professional player, to being an international player. In your experience and understanding of the underage system in Italy, how likely do you think that those under-20s now, or maybe the ones that were there last year, but that current underage group can come and make a difference? I mean, are they a special group? Are they just a very good team? And also in terms of progression, how many, are they likely to come through, or is there a big fall off, in Italian rugby, of those talented youngsters who don't make it through?
Well, I think the key to that part, first of all, they are talented. They are very talented. They're as talented as the Irish. They're as talented as the Welsh. They beat England last time out, that sort of stuff, But what happens after the under-20 is what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. You need to continuously learn at a very high level. And when they come into the franchises, or when they stay with club rugby, which is a completely different level altogether, but even if they come straight into the franchises, they come into Zebre and they come into Treviso, if Zebre and Treviso are operating at the level they're operating relative to the competition in the Six Nations, then they learn, but they don't learn at the required level for them to be competitive at Six Nations. That's basically the conundrum as it is. So the talent is there. You know, like everybody knows about Garbisi, but there's the lad who scored there, Minoncello on the wing. He's actually a very good centre. He's a fabulous 13. He's really very, very good. Marin is a number 10 stroke, number 15. Is a very, very talented player. These are from last year. Garbisi's year, there was about 5 players came through who are, you know, they have the potential to be very good international players. But if they slot into Zebre and if they slot into Treviso and they operate at that level, then they're not going to develop. Garbisi goes to Montpellier, which actually is good for Garbisi.
Yeah.
You know, Riccioni goes to Saracens. Unfortunately, he smashed his leg. He's a very, very good player, but he left Treviso, which is, in my opinion, the right thing to do. I mean, if you look at Scottish rugby with 2 franchises, Donal, you mentioned it at the top of the program, they are leaving their top players go to France and to England, to clubs that want them. So it clears the way for the next generation to come through relatively quickly. And that system works for Scotland. I mean, Scotland are a serious rugby team. They have been for the last couple of years. I mean, Ireland, I don't know how Ireland have beat them 4 or 5 times in a row, but they could have lost every one of the games. You know, for me, I was surprised Scotland lost to Wales. And if they hadn't lost to Wales, I think they would have been serious contenders, even for a Grand Slam.
Yeah, but I think that's a very good point. I mean, you saw Adam Hastings going off to Gloucester now, for example. You know, when you only have the 2 franchises, that's only 2 number 10s that you could pick, or 2 scrum halves who are playing top class rugby. So it's actually in their benefit for them to go away. The Finn Russell's going off to Paris. What it also does is it brings outside influences into your squad. Otherwise, you've the same Treviso, Zebre fellas. Those fellas must know each other backwards. They must be fed up and looking at each other. I mean, bringing in guys who have experiences elsewhere and can raise the standards in terms of training and preparation and nutrition, and they just learn from these guys. I mean, that has to be hugely beneficial. And, you know, then I suppose the flip side of it, you have a fella like Garbisi, he goes to Montpellier where he's playing very well and getting a lot of game time. But there's almost, because he's only maybe 1 or 2 who are coming in from the outside, there's an incredible level of expectation on him. Now, there's enough pressure on a number 10 at the majority of the time, but when you're sort of seen as carrying the team, and look, he didn't have his best game against England last time out, and it was almost his fault that Italy were under pressure. So it's a balance, but you know, I agree. I think the Scotland model is working incredibly well for them. And if you only have 2 franchises, then the more fellas you've playing overseas, the better, because it can only lift the standard of everybody else.
Yeah, and Scott, I mean, I was listening. I was one of the November matches, and Flower Scotland came on, and the first 5 people who I saw on the Scottish team were all South African. So we'll say their long-term strategic plan to get in players who aren't necessarily born and bred in Scotland, but are eligible to play for Scotland, to make the side very competitive, to promote the game throughout the country. That's a good strategy.
Is it a strategy that's been used enough in Italy? I know there have been plenty of, you know, New Zealand.
No, not at the level of Scotland. Scotland are very active in that, Neil. I mean,
in Italy, are they stumbling across the good players? You know, are they signing someone who eventually just qualifies, or are they actively trying to?
No, they're actively out there looking. I was in Edinburgh in 2011, 12, 13, and there would be strategic meetings about, okay, this position, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We might need a 5th. This position we have 2. We need another. Let's go and see what's available to us, you know. And then they would actively. They'd search. I mean, hats off to them. They'd search through their own contacts, all corners of the world to see, and then they'd have a conversation, and then they might make a strategic move on a player, you know.
To move on the conversation a bit, lads, away from specifically just Italy, but just the future of the competition in general, because the conversation around Italy in the last 10 days or so has kind of thrown that up when we talk about South Africa as well. But like, if we're talking about bringing South Africa into an expanded competition. It looks like obviously that Italy wouldn't be got rid of because they obviously have a vote and could just veto it in general. But if we're talking about bringing in South Africa, why not open up the door entirely? Bring in Georgia. Look at Romania. Look at other countries as well, and completely start with a blank canvas and a blank sheet of paper and try build something.
I think you have to be careful what you ask for. Number one, there's only so many weekends that players by and large, like they earn their living playing for their clubs, be it in Gallagher Premiership, Top 14, URC. There's only so many games that you can play at international level. So, expanding those competitions, you got to look at what is the consequence of that. As it is, I think, teams or countries are playing an average of 12, 13 internationals a year. I think it's too much. Also, now one of the issues here is the international game is the engine that drives the finances, which pays for the provincial scene. I mean, I think 85% of the finances generated in Ireland is done so through the national team. And of course, those resources are used to pay and keep the 4 provinces afloat. But the Six Nations, for me, it is the best international rugby competition in the world outside of the World Cup. I think you need to be careful not to tinker with it too much. There was a time when you could play in New Zealand maybe once every 3 years or every 4 years. Now every November they're up here. And even the bite has gone out of it. Do you know what I mean? You can see Ireland play New Zealand twice every 3 years. You can go to New Zealand next summer, see them play 3 times in a row. So the mystique has almost gone out of it. So I think you need to be careful to keep the balance right between the club game and the international game. When you talk about your Georgias and Italy should go promotion, relegation, I mean, that's a difficult one. I mean, I saw Georgia, I think they drew with Portugal in the second tier of European rugby last week. And Italy, everybody's saying Georgia should come in, but Italy, every time they've been put to the pin of their collar, Italy have beaten Georgia. So Italy right now are a better team than Georgia. So it's difficult to, you can change things, but yeah, as I say, you look at rugby, it got out of hand in the Southern Hemisphere. Super Rugby, I mean, they were looking at, you had 11 different time zones. You had, I was in Australia 2018, and it was absolutely clear the Australians had enough of this. There was no way that they were going to continue traveling around the world. The Australian guys said, look, we want to play the top New Zealand teams home and away because we're just fed up. Otherwise, they'll all leave and they'll go away and they'll live in England. So they've revamped Super Rugby now, and there's an opportunity there with 2 Pacific Island teams in there. So that's an interesting development. But, expanding the Six Nations, for me, I think would be ridiculous. I just think there's enough games that's there. It's the history, the tradition, the colour. They are talking about having this sort of World League, through November and the June tests anyway. So to be like, people have only so much money that they can afford to turn up at so many international games. So I think you just need to be careful where you go at the next stage of this.
Yeah, Donal, I worked in like 2 of the countries there you talked about, Romania and Georgia, and like for me, guys, they're miles and miles away from it. Like in Georgia, they're much further down the road than Romania. Romania, talking to the Romanians, because the Romanians played an emerging match in Parma a couple of months ago. And when I worked there, they had, I think, 8 what they call Super League teams, which would be the same as the AIL. Okay, and from that, they fed their national side with the players that are abroad. Now that's now gone down to 5 teams. So you have 5 AIL teams. So you're saying to me that this country, picking up a couple of players in France who are playing in Pro D2 or Pro D3, it should play in Twickenham and 82,000 with people paying £100 sterling a ticket to get hit by 100 points. It's daft. So,
trying to play devil's advocate, like how do you make the likes of Romania and Georgia and some of those other European teams better and bring them up to Italy's level? Which, let's be honest as well, if Italy are having more games that they're winning by narrow margins, I'm not talking about putting 30 points on Georgia when they meet once every year or two, but if a team like Italy can have more games that they're winning competitively, surely that generates a lot more interest as well, and it makes everyone else a little bit better. So what I'm asking is, like, how do you go about actually bringing those smaller teams up to a greater level? Because as it stands, surely with the Rugby Europe Championship, if that's the ceiling, winning the Rugby Euro Championship, like how can they get up to Italy?
Okay, so I understand the question. So the question back to you then, Neil, is what is the most successful franchise in the world in terms of generating money for a sport that you're aware of?
Would it be the Six Nations, would it?
No, no. They don't even have franchise agreements. It's American football.
Yeah.
Okay. It's American football. So maybe the Six Nations itself, rather than looking at Italy, rather than looking at Georgia and looking at Romania and South Africa, maybe the Six Nations needs to do a little bit of soul searching itself and move away from the historical, okay, we're all in this together and we have our own club, and become more professional itself and start writing down what a franchise agreement is for a team to compete in the Six Nations. And then that would put a structure. Ireland already have it, England, Wales, Scotland, they already have it. And maybe there's a bit of tweaking they have to do, but then Italy don't have it, and then they will have it. And let's see where that goes. And if South Africa come in, then they have to have it. And then so there's the maturing of the actual organization of the sport as opposed to the participants in the sport. Because if you give somebody 20 million and say, listen, do your best there and be competitive in 5 matches, so they take the 20 million and say, thanks very much. So maybe it's the sport itself, as in the organization of the Six Nations needs to mature rather than looking at the countries, look at themselves.
Birch, is that something you could see happening? Would it take a lot of generosity from the wealthier nations?
Oh, look, I think I totally agree with Brad that it would be a positive thing, but it won't happen. I can't see it happening, to be honest, because they don't see the compelling need to do it. Because let's be honest, Scotland are happy, Ireland are happy, Wales at WRU level are happy, the regions aren't. England and France are happy now. So it would take drastic measures for them to look at themselves like that. But I do agree with Michael. It would totally professionalize the whole thing.
What about CVC? Are they happy? Because now you're talking serious money here.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Within a few years, if Italy continue to lose and lose and lose, you'd have to imagine CVC aren't going to be too happy, would you?
Well, they'll only get upset if their investment looks like it's not going to pay a dividend. And at the moment, I would agree with you, Brad. I'd say they're wondering. I'd say they can't believe how unprofessional it is at that high level. And you know what it's like.
Yeah.
But again, at the end of the day, they'll probably look to just get out with obviously making a profit. But if they can't see a profit, they will start to kick up a fuss. And what's
the problem with putting franchise agreements in there? Like if it works commercially and it supports a sport in the best possible way financially, I mean, it's a good argument to put forward instead of looking at a single country and saying that they have to do X, Y, and Z. Everybody has to do it, everybody has to have, and then you use the expertise that CVC have. Because they're a world organization. They have their finger in every pie. And then you ask some of them, you get a team from CVC and they go to, okay, Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, France, and Italy. Okay, guys, this is what you're going to do to maximize your return to develop the game in your country, rather than leaving it up to the individual country. It's too easy. And this would be a point that was made to Pro 14 3 years ago by Connor, and I don't suspect anything has happened since. And CVC probably is the opportunity now.
I tell you, to be an interesting conversation when CVC walk into the boards of the RFU and the RFU and they tell them, right, lads, this is where we're going. I mean, the bottom line is CVC came in with the offer of cash at a time when rugby was hemorrhaging money. That money should have been, the percentages that they've bought in the Gallagher Premiership and URC and everything. That should have been sort of earmarked, if you like, for further development down the road. But unfortunately, it's all been sucked in and keeping the game alive because of the fallout of the pandemic. CVC at the moment, they're on the brink of agreeing a deal with South Africa. So that's, that'll be a game changer in terms of then you have CVC from their perspective. Of course, will have a vested interest in South Africa coming into the Six Nations. So as Bert said, look, these venture capitalists, they're in it for long-term gain. But the minute they see their investment coming under pressure, well, that creates a different argument. So look, I mean, but that's where the game is at the moment. It's teetering. And as I say, the implications of South Africa leaving the Rugby Championship and the broadcast money and all that they bring to the table down there, if that's gone in 5 years' time, and Australia and New Zealand will get fed up of playing each other, and they won't be able to generate enough money to keep their games alive. So I think the professional game, the pandemic has highlighted for me just how brittle the professional game is. I mean, soccer had the resources and the means to be able to survive the issues of the last 2 years. Professional rugby is only 27 years old. So from that point of view, you're just seeing how delicate the professional game is.
We might move on the conversation now that we've solved this crisis, because there are a few games coming up this weekend. Notably, Ireland against Italy this Sunday afternoon at the Aviva Stadium. Team is going to be named Friday, so a day or two later than we're normally used to. So normally on the podcast, we're kind of reacting to the team being announced, fellas. But obviously this time around, we can predict things. There are a few decisions to make. First of all, I'll start with you, Birch. Who starts in the 11 jersey? James Lowe or Mac Hansen this week?
I'd like to see Hansen play, and I'd like to see James Lowe play, and that's not any slight on Hansen. I think Hansen's had 2 decent games, but I just think Lowe may be needed against Scotland or England, and I think obviously he got 25 minutes off the bench against the Ospreys the weekend. I'd like to see him play. I thought our kicking game struggled against France. I think there's a lot of pressure on Gibson Park or Joey Carberry if Lowe isn't in the team, or a natural left footer. And I'd like to see him get a game, see where he's at international level. And on the other wing, I'd like to see Ballatloon play, to be honest. And that, again, I think Conway and Hansen have been really good, but we need to develop depth and we need to develop options.
Michael, a lot of people kind of every year, it seems people kind of, as soon as the Italy game comes around, they kind of say this is the opportunity to change the team around, to make 10 changes, give 3 or 4 debuts, but it never really works out that way, does it? It sometimes it's just about kind of tinkering in a couple of selections.
Yeah, well, if I was in Farr's shoes, I'd be looking more towards the English game. And the selection I would be tinkering with if I was looking at it, like you look at the physicality of England. So somebody like Henshaw might end up in the centre in either 12 or 13 as a possibility. Low, as Birch said there, the kicking game is going to be important against England to be able to get out of your red zone. So they might take the view that they'll prepare for the English match through the Italian game, and they certainly won't be looking any further than obviously a good result against England and a very competitive match in Twickenham. So I suspect most of the selections will be based on what they feel is the right team for England and how they want to play that match. Now, your key one is going to be your number 10. See which way you go there. So if you go running game against England, maybe you don't put in Henshaw, or if you do put in Henshaw, you put him in 12, and leave Ringrose in at 13 because he was obviously got a super try there against Wales, etc. But against a big French side who put a lot of numbers in the defence line and basically stopped Ireland coming around the corner and getting kind of momentum that they're used to, and then Birch is correct, without a secondary kicking option to get out of the 22. So all these things will be up for discussion, you know. So I would have gone with Lowe, and the question is how, like, Carberry and Ringrose probably go together for me, and then Sexton and Henshaw would go the other way together for me. You know what I mean?
Donal, what changes would you like to see, or what changes are you expecting to see?
Well, they're two different questions, aren't they? Really,
that's why I separated them.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, and this is where Italy have become an issue for the wrong reason. In many championships, the number of points you put up against Italy can dictate who wins the championship, because so many championships in recent years have come down to points differential. We all remember the Super Saturdays we had when it was a try one way or the other, made the difference between winning and losing a championship. So Andy Farrell, on the one hand, he wants to win a championship. There's no doubt about that. Now, I still think he can tweak his team and still be competitive enough to do a number on Italy. Up front, I suppose the one thing you've got to say for Andy Farrell is our injury profile is incredible. Like Ronan Gallagher is out, and we know that he's out for the rest of the championship. But you know, you look at the Italians already; they had a number of players unavailable to them coming into the championship, and they've lost another 3 or 4 since. So I think up front is going to be a different challenge against England. I see for this weekend, for example, they have Courtney Laws is back in the picture, Joe Launchbury's back, Manu Tuilagi is back. So all of a sudden, those 3 players make England a totally different animal. So if you use Brad's analogy, where you're using the Italian game as your springboard for the next one, well, then for me, Ian Henderson comes into the picture. You know what I mean? Now, Ty Byrne has been outstanding. So do you take him out of the second row, put him into the back row? Do you pick Henderson and leave James Ryan out? Now, James Ryan, for me, in the last 2 games has recaptured the form that he had prior to those concussions. But I think, you know, they're debates that Andy Farrell is going to have. You could well play Ty Byrne 6, put Caelan Doris at 8, and start Jack Conan on the bench. But I do think we're going to have to look at ways of you know, the French asked questions of us physically, and I've no doubt England will do the same. So in terms of beating Italy is one thing, using this game as a mechanism to prepare for the England game is the next thing. So for me, the likes of Henderson has to come into the debate.
And does Johnny Sexton come in for Joey Carberry this week, or is he being given an extra, not even an extra week, an extra 2 weeks to just get himself right after the hamstring injury? Because we've another.
Yeah, well, I felt after the look, you've got to. This is where the longer term project comes into play for me. I mean, we all know Johnny Sexton, despite the fact that he's 36 years of age, he's head and shoulders against the next fellas looking to come up behind him. Andy Farrell has spread the net far and wide. We had the Byrne brothers, we had Billy Burns, Jack Carty is back in the mix now. But Joey Carberry, I think, in difficult circumstances. Remember, Joey Carberry had only 17 minutes of rugby played from October when he went in to start in the last game against France. And you're talking about France and the Stade de France. This is as big a test as you're going to get. And I thought Carberry was outstanding. So from that point of view, with more the longer term objective of the World Cup, I would start Carberry, and I'd look to bring Johnny Sexton on for the last 30 minutes, because you're going to need Sexton and he needs game time before the England match. And I also think that last 30 minutes, you look at England actually struggled. They didn't score, I think, from 4 minutes into the second half against Italy until 5 minutes to go. France had a sort of a fallow period against Italy as well. I think Johnny Sexton coming off the bench with 30 minutes to go, that drives Ireland even more in the last quarter of the game. And it also gives Joey Carberry what would only be his second start in Six Nations rugby. So I like, in terms of that one selection, I would be clouded by what I want to achieve down the road. Further than England, I'd be looking towards the World Cup. So that would influence the decision for me.
Is that the best of both worlds, Birch? Give Carberry the start, and you can still give Johnny Sexton 20 minutes plus off the bench to keep him ticking over.
Yeah, I think I'd be totally in favour of that as well. Just it's important for Joey to back it up, but also I do think it's important that Sexton, if he's fully fit, gets some game time, because I think he will start against England.
I've been hoping to kind of touch on the other games, but I think we ended up getting so into that conversation around Italy. It's really only quick fire predictions. Really, is probably all we have time for before we wrap it up here. So I suppose on all 3 games this weekend, Michael, I might start with you. Ireland, Italy. What are you expecting? Are we just more realistically looking at an Irish win, bonus point even?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Comfortable. Yeah.
England, Wales at Twickenham, and then that's also on Saturday, and then also on Saturday then as well as Scotland, France at Murrayfield. How do you see those going?
Obviously, well, not obviously, but I would go England bonus point win for England, and I'd go Scotland against France.
Scotland have a good record in recent years against France. Donal, what way do you see this weekend's games going?
Yeah, I think, Ireland will win. I think England will beat Wales in Twickenham, especially with the infusion they're going to get from those fellas coming back. Impressed by the way Wales bounced back against Scotland. But look, they were really poor against Ireland. Scotland-France is the game with the debate. For me, France have lost twice to Scotland in the last 2 years. I think there was points against Ireland and New Zealand where France showed a resilience that we haven't seen for them for a long time. So I'm going to go for France to get the first. If you park Italy, to be the first away win in the Six Nations in a game that the Italians aren't involved in. So I'm going to go for France marginally away. And
finally to you, Birch. I see actually even just this morning been reported in the UK, Lewis Rees-Zammett's been dropped by Wales. They haven't named their team, but it's been reported he's been sent back to Gloucester this weekend.
Yeah,
strange call. I know he didn't have the finest game ever against Scotland, but
no, that's a big call. I think if Wales are to beat England, they probably need a couple of their most exciting players to have huge games, and I think England would be happy he's not playing. I agree with Donal. I think England will win that. I think Brad's could be right. They could get a bonus point. I think England will do a job on Wales, and I think France will struggle against Scotland, but just might be good enough to get through.
So full house for Ireland, full house for England, and we've got 2 going for France. And I think was it you, Donal, that said Scotland to beat France?
No, I went for Scotland and I went for CBC.
CBC, is it?
No, Donal, their day is gone now. PBC.
What a way to wrap it up. What a way to wrap it up with CBC. But no, just a reminder, England Wales, that is the live game this Saturday on RT2. Live radio commentary on RTÉ Radio 1 on Sunday afternoon for Ireland against Italy at the Aviva Stadium as well. And we'll have plenty of reaction, I'm sure, with the lads next week on Against the Head and the Rugby podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday as well. But Michael Bradley, thanks a million for joining us this afternoon. Donal and Birch, thanks as usual. And we'll speak to you next week.
The RTÉ Rugby podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.